Michael and I probably both subscribe to the theory that, 90% of life and reporting is just showing up. Like, if you're there, as Michael says, if you go, the chances are that something good is going to happen. Nothing particularly good happens by not going, right?
Welcome to the Nieman Storyboard podcast, where we dig into the craft of journalism and storytelling. I'm Mark Armstrong, editor of Nieman Storyboard. This show is brought to you by the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. You can get updates by signing up for our newsletter. Just go to niemanstoryboard.org to sign up. Today, I'm excited to feature a conversation about the relationships that develop between reporters and editors, and how they help each other find and tell their best stories. Reporter Michael Kruse and his editor, Bill Duryea, started working together 16 years ago when they were both at the Tampa Bay Times, then known as the St. Petersburg Times. Their partnership ended up spanning multiple publications when they moved to Politico and Politico magazine in 2015. Kruse is a senior staff writer there, and Bill has just joined the Washington Post as the senior editor for America. It's a bittersweet moment for Michael and Bill, now working at different publications, but we thought this might be a great moment to reflect on their experience together. What makes reporter and editor relationships work? And what lessons can writers and editors learn from their long-running collaboration? So without further ado, here's my conversation with Michael Kruse and Bill Duryea. Bill, Michael, thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Oh gosh, yeah, this is a total delight already.
Now, did you, Bill, when did you start the Washington Post? Is this the first time you're all talking since you stopped working directly together?
Uh-oh. No, it's not. No.
Yeah, be careful.
No. We've talked. I was just in Washington the last few days and saw Bill. It had been a little bit of time. We wanted to get together, of course. So I saw him in Washington, and we just had a going away thing for him near Politico as well. So
I've seen Michael more this week than I have seen him in months, years of working together at Politico. Like, they're just more.
That's true.
Yeah.
Was it very much a remote relationship, given, Michael, that you're probably on the road a lot and out reporting?
Well, so I live in North Carolina and have since the summer of 2016. And so, yeah, it was a remote relationship in that respect. But I feel like I never felt that remote relationship was distant in any way. I was in and out of D.C., I suppose, enough in an average year to see Bill, a handful of times a year at least. So, and we were on, phone calls and in communication sort of semi-constantly, so it never felt remote the way that it might.
I would say that, yeah, absolutely. By the time that you moved to Charlotte, Michael, I think we probably already worked together for 6 or 7 years, right? So we were already kind of simpatico, if that's the right word, and capable of mind meld from distance.
I don't know that our arrangement at Politico for most of our nearly 11 years together at Politico would have worked as well as it did had we not had that previous relationship at the St. Pete Times, now the Tampa Bay Times, and also a year and a half in the Washington area together in the same newsroom as well. I don't know that this would have worked as well, me living down here, flying out of Charlotte instead of DCA, if not for, a pretty long run already of a relationship with Bill.
Yeah. Can we go back to the very beginning where this all started? How you first got together? Who joined the St. Pete Times first? What was the chronology of this?
Well, Mark, I'm so old that, Michael, I don't know, where were you, in middle school when I started at the St. Pete Times?
What year exactly did you start at the St. Pete Times?
1990, March of 1990.
Yeah, I was in middle school. Yeah. But, so you got there in 1990. I started at the St. Pete Times in 2005. I met Bill that summer. If I recall, at Mike Wilson's house at a party. You had just returned from Ann Arbor, I think.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I did a fellowship up there.
I started, as most people do, at the St. Pete Times, or certainly at that time, in a couple outer bureaus before I made my way eventually down to the main office in St. Pete. And so met Bill in 2005. I think the first time we worked together on a story might have started in 2007, and then we started working together full-time in early 2009, I think, if I have my dates correct.
What do you remember about Michael's reporting and writing and working with him, Bill, on that first?
From the early days?
Yeah.
The assiduousness of his reporting. If this is a word, his Hoover-like ability to gather information and his willingness just to keep reporting. What struck me is then was the things that have struck me, and ever since is that, like, the doggedness, the willingness to make another call and another call and another call.
Michael, did you know at that time, what you were seeking from an editor like Bill?
Well, at that time, working in the bureaus, it was, I guess, part of my plan, to the extent that I had a plan, to try to have a somewhat regular rhythm of doing some stories for editors downtown that I wanted to work with and get to know better. Not to say that I didn't value and prioritize my beat work in those bureaus, but part of what I thought was the opportunity at the St. Pete Times was to take advantage of this wealth of reporting and storytelling knowledge, both editors and fellow reporters throughout that enterprise at the time, certainly in the main office in St. Pete, in the office in Tampa, throughout the organization. And so there were people like Mike Wilson, Kelly Bennett French now, Tom French, and Bill and others that I wanted to sort of expose myself and expose my work to their expertise. And so the stories that I would pitch to Floridian, to 1A, very specifically with those places in mind, were my way of trying to get to work more with people like Bill. And so eventually that worked. That the plan over the course of 3 or 4 years came to fruition when I was assigned to work with Bill full time.
Was there an existing structure? I mean, so St. Pete Times, now Tampa Bay Times, is legendary for its feature writing, for narrative. And I'm just curious if there was, a program essentially in which a junior reporter comes in and they start doing their reporting, and then they come to someone like you, Bill, and it becomes a coaching program in addition to the editing of an actual story. What did that look like?
This is such an interesting question because I don't know that there was a program or a structure per se, but what Michael sort of touched on it a second ago, there were so many examples in that newsroom, not just examples, but exemplars in that newsroom. Tom French being one of them, Ann Hull being another, David Finkel,
Rick Bragg.
Even before that, Rick Bragg. And they...
David Barstow.
David Barstow.
On and on.
Yeah, there's so many, and they had done so much great narrative work, each in their own ways. Serial narratives, investigative narratives. Mike Wilson had done it as well. There's so many examples of it. It was so inculcated into the identity of the paper that even if you weren't there was no program per se, but for example, I, as a police reporter in the 90s, was hyper conscious of the need to do a serial narrative like Ann Hull had done, like Tom French had done. And it just was that was what I aspired to, and Michael coming, a few years after me, it was feeling the same thing, you just saw in the newsroom the people, they were just there, and you just wanted to work with them, do that work. So it wasn't programmed, but it was unavoidable. I don't know how else to sort of explain it.
Just sort of in the air, in the water. I mean, you read as I almost recruited myself to the St. Pete Times. I mean, I was reading all this stuff. The St. Pete Times came onto my radar screen mainly because of a very specific trip to the Nieman Narrative Conference in Cambridge. I went there with my friend Ben Montgomery. We were at the Times Herald Record in sort of downstate New York together. And all the panels that certainly spoke to me and to Ben too, the most seemed to be people from the St. Pete Times. And so I decided there that like, this is the place where I need to go from the Times Herald Record. I need to make that happen somehow because I want to write like these people. I want to learn how to report like these people. I want to work with the editors these people clearly are working with, because whatever they're doing, I want to try to do. I want to try to learn. I want to try to get as good as they seem to be at this, I guess, kind of journalism. And so, there was not like a boot camp. It was not like there was some sort of manual. It was just sort of a more organic thing. And I mean, still, I've never worked at a place where there's like such a, not that I worked at too many places, but there's never been a place where there's just such a sort of culture of shop talk. You don't even call it shop talk. You're just talking about how to do the work. You're talking about the work. Who else is doing the work? You just live in it. And, clearly like my relationship with Bill sort of existed within that wider culture. And then, that's what you're trying to do. How do you get steadily better from story to story, from year to year? Just a incredibly invigorating, fulfilling way to do this work in this industry.
I will add one thing to that idea of like there being a culture but not a program. There were so many editors in that in that building, actually in the buildings, right? Because it wasn't just the downtown. It was actually inculcated into the ethic of the bureaus. Everybody understood this, like what the St. Pete Times, the Tampa Bay Times did, and supported that in large respect. I had, before I worked with Mike Wilson so closely, I had Neville Green, who had worked with Ann Hull on, on many of her, and Tom French on many of their serial narratives. So, he was always scouting for that next story. And when he saw that I had one, or one of my colleagues in the Tampa bureau, Sue Carlton, had one, he identified it and said, let's make that happen. It was editors helping reporters do this. You didn't have to fight, you had to work hard, but you didn't have to fight for that, that opportunity. Editors were primed to make it happen if they thought that the story merited that treatment. Then my time comes as an editor, and I always wanted to honor that ethic.
Michael, do you remember any sort of key lessons from the first couple collaborations with Bill?
I mean, it's long enough now where I would struggle to come up with like specifics to specific stories, but I think it was an introduction to like all of the stuff that we've tried to do ever since. You can't write well if you don't first and foremost report well. As you report, you're in communication with your editor. It's not like, see you later, see you 2 months from now or 3 months from now or 2 weeks from now. Like, what do you have? No, you're talking about what you're learning, what it might mean, what else we need to go get, who do we need to talk to, what's missing. Once you get to a place where you feel like you're getting closer to being able to sort of tell the story, to do the story, well, how do you do it? Talk about, structure. It's very much a team effort. It's not, Bill is not assigning me something and then correcting the draft when I give it to him later. It is an ongoing conversation. The story is the product of the relationship throughout that process of each individual story, and also sort of the larger body of work. So that's what stood out to me, I think, even in that first story we mentioned earlier. Just the level of conversation. What do you have? What might we do with that? What else do we need? And then you keep getting sort of more and more high level, I suppose, where it's like, well, what is this? What are we actually getting at? And so that sort of experience, I was already doing, I think, some of that even in bureau works, and sort of how I'm trying to think about it, just with conversations with people already at the paper, conversations with story mentors, but to have that not only be available with a relationship with an editor, but more than available, like required. Like that is what we're doing here. That's what needs to happen. And that's how the story gets done in the best possible way.
That would be a good segue into a story I'm looking at right now on the Tampa Bay Times archive. By nature, he's a social creature. So this is about a monkey on the loose in the Tampa Bay area. So what do you remember about the origins of this piece?
I think my recollection of that is that that was Michael's instinct. We're going to profile a primate and see if we can do that. Because there was how long had that been going on, Michael?
It was kind of an ongoing story in the area, like monkeys, like the sightings of this monkey.
Yeah.
And, sort of funny, you'd have the latest monkey sighting on 3B of the Metro section, right? And so the monkey became kind of this cartoon character, part of, the communal life of the Tampa Bay metro area. And I think after a while, just reading that enough, I wanted to, stitch together those little, let me back up. One of the ways that I certainly looked for stories in St. Pete in Florida, and still, though, in its own way, in the more politics-centric arena, is to read articles, to be a generally curious, informed citizen, and to spot places in these articles or articles themselves that are pieces of larger stories. Articles aren't stories. They are a beginning of a story or a middle of a story or an end of a story, right? And so one of the ways to do this is to, read an article or a series of articles about something like this, sort of recurrent sightings of this monkey, and say, well, what's the larger story here? What's going on with this monkey? What's this monkey looking for? And I don't remember at this point, how I got to, we should just profile the monkey, but I think it was probably some amount of pre-reporting to, call some primate experts. What is this monkey searching for? Why is this monkey running here? Is there any explanation? And I think, the idea that this monkey's not having a good time for our entertainment, but is in some primal way looking for another one of its kind and probably will not find that. Totally recast the story of the monkey to me. And so, again, it's been long enough. I don't recall having this conversation with Bill, but I'm quite sure that at some point I was we should pursue a story about what this monkey's really doing to make people to complicate what had become the narrative of the runaway monkey of Tampa Bay.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think I can't recreate those conversations either, but I will testify to what Michael is saying. The first instinct was, maybe there's a whole narrative just in the monkey's journey. And then somewhere along the line, we realized, well, there's more to it than just tracing points on a map. Where did he go? But I wish I knew, but what prompted this conversation, but I think we just got to the point where we were trying to get inside the monkey's head a little bit, right? What is a primate motivation for moving around what is I don't know, what was it, 100 miles or something?
All over the place, right?
Yeah.
And part of the reporting was literally at one point mapping out the sightings and making that drive. Of course, I'm not seeing it precisely what the monkey would have seen, going from point A to point B to point C and so on. The monkey's not driving down US 19 or what have you, but there was a way, that was part of the reporting, to say, what is the monkey seeing, right? When it goes from, Palm Harbor to Clearwater or whatever. And then, talking to people who spotted the monkey, in this house or that house, talking to people who had been trying to catch the monkey and take it back to where the monkey might be more at home or more captive or less sort of messing around with people's bird feeders and what have you. So you're just sort of recreating it and storifying this sort of collection of monkey sightings that had sort of, again, become this kind of ongoing ha-ha story in the Metro report.
Yeah, not what the monkey's seeing, but what the monkey's looking for. That's somewhere in those conversations we got to that idea. of like a more an interesting, deeper frame on the piece.
And you're also, through the monkey, it became clear to us, I think, that there was an opportunity to say something about, you're always looking for something like this in any story, really, but there's an opportunity to say something about all of us. This profile of the monkey is no longer just about the monkey. It's about loneliness, connection, togetherness, lack thereof, the costs of aloneness. Yeah, I remember talking to a loneliness person who'd written a book about loneliness for a profile about a monkey. And again, like all this stuff is and was super fun, but it also requires a place that supports that kind of work and an editor who can say, yeah, let's talk about the monkey. Oh, that's interesting. Like, what are you going to do next with the monkey? Like, to where you're spending, I don't know how long that was, probably just over the course of time, a couple of weeks, a few weeks maybe, or I was working on other things. I don't know. I don't remember it being a super heavy lift, but there needs to be sort of a permission structure in the form of the institution and also in the form of your editor and your relationship with your editor for Bill to be like, I don't quite know what we're going to end up with this quote unquote profile of the monkey, but it'll somehow be worth it.
I got to say, I was, this was published in 2010. Reading it again in the wake of COVID, the story about freedom and isolation, and that being free doesn't mean you're actually free. There's so many lessons in this story. So on one level, it was a really moving piece. And then the other, just sort of taking it paragraph by paragraph, the amount of detail about what's motivating this monkey that you bring in, and you're not couching it in all of this expert attribution. It's just flowing through, and it's just really amazing to read. And I'm wondering if there's a passage we could have you read from this.
Sure. The monkey right now is looking for three things: food by day, sleep by night, and always, always one of his own kind. First, though, the food. He's a diurnal animal, which means he gets up with the sun and looks for food. It would be easier if he had another monkey to help, but he's okay. Rhesus macaques are opportunistic omnivores. They're not tool users the way a chimp might use a rock or a stick, but they have big, sharp canines and agile, capable hands. They eat pretty much everything we eat, and then some. Berries and fruit, lizards and bugs, some roots and some leaves, maybe a mouse. But mostly human food. An apple core, yes please. Trash can slop, that'll do too. A thrown-out, half-eaten carton of kung pao chicken, game on.
I love that. A couple other pieces that really hit on loneliness and isolation in some of that period of your work at the Tampa Bay Times. One is about the story of Catherine Norris, the woman who disappeared inside her own home. And then another about the bag boy at Publix with an MBA. And I'm wondering, and those were some that I remember from my early long reads days, and some that you both shared as well. And I'm wondering what you remember about both of those and that period in terms of your work together as you were looking for those stories.
A great question. The bag boy story came well before the Catherine Norris story, right, Michael?
I think so. They might have run sort of somewhat in the same vicinity of time. I'm pretty sure the bag boy story. It was one of a series of stories about the recession,
and how people were dealing with the Great Recession. Yeah, that story arrived in our inbox. Right, we put out a query to people that hey, tell us your story. We found him, but I don't know. The story isn't the story until you go and report it the way you reported it, with him literally in the store, watching him at home deal with his kids. A little stumped there because it just was such a devastating story for me, because the guy was trying to preserve his dignity in front of his kids and doing it in the noblest, most humbling way I've ever seen.
It's funny that you keyed in on sort of that theme, because I don't remember that being like anything we thought about in some holistic way. I don't remember thinking about loneliness and isolation as something I was keying in on when identifying potential stories. But it makes some sense, because one of the things that always struck me about Florida this was between the lines of Florida. This was somewhere under the surface. So many newcomers. It was the kind of place where like neighbors didn't know each other. I mean, of course there are exceptions, but when I first moved there and throughout my decade living there, for such a busy place and a place known for, second chances and sunshine and fun, there was also like an incredible loneliness and sadness and desperation. And so I didn't think about that as like loneliness, sadness, and desperation. Let me go find stories about that. It was just part of, to me, existence. The human condition, maybe, period, of course, but maybe in particular in this very strange place called Florida. And so it couldn't help but see some stories and see some story opportunities associated with those pregnant, poignant themes.
That's absolutely true with Catherine Norris. I think we both, because we had been in the state for long enough at that point, like we'd absorbed those ideas into our worldview, if you will, right? We just seen it too many times. Transplants who never quite integrate into the fabric of their communities, and how that could happen. In Catherine Norris's case, in a community of townhomes where they're like literally the walls are shared. Okay, how does that happen? And that I don't think that was not hard for us to immediately see the richness of the theme there.
It was a brief, and I mean this is actually a pretty good example of how some of these stories might work, and how our relationship was working even at that fairly early stage. We'd probably been working together, two, maybe not even when that story first started, 2 years. Read a brief. I think I read a brief maybe in the Times, maybe there was some brief coverage as well in the Orlando Sentinel, and it was just sort of like this one day kind of ghoulish discovery story that made some local news over in that area, and that was that. And the question was, to go back to the idea of so many articles or briefs are just pieces of a much larger story. It was just like, how does this woman end up this way? How do neighbors not notice? How does she I mean, the driving question of that story, or one of the main driving questions of that reporting in that story, once it published, was there from the very beginning. Like, how does this happen? How does a woman disappear inside her own home? And saw what was available from a public records standpoint, or the start of it. But other than that, it was just me going over to Bill's cubicle and saying, "What do you think, Catherine Norris? Yeah, get in your car and drive over there." I mean, like that. There's an element of faith involved, right? Just go.
And what happened? You went, and the new owner, was it the new owner who let you in?
Yeah.
To the house?
The new owner was, sorting through her belongings. In his mind, it was trash. It needed to be sort of gotten rid of. Understandably, it was his property now. He was, of course, aware of the oddity of the previous owner, but this is a property of his, an investment of his, and he's sort of going through it. And I introduced myself again. These sorts of questions that anybody who reports at all, really, with any depth, sort of has, where you have to describe to a normal person what you're trying to do here. Even I don't really know at the time. It's like, I'm not really sure what the story is, but it is very interesting to me. Like, how does this happen to a woman? And trying to do it in on some lurid way, but like a genuinely curious sort of way, trying to create that rapport with the new owner the way that you would try to create rapport with anybody. And like, I don't mind. Sure. Look around, you can take whatever you want. She had, knickknacks, anything that could help me. At the end, I don't know what the story is. I don't know what her story is, but anything that could help me sort of piece it together. And it really wasn't until that evening when I got back to the hotel in that area over there by Cape Canaveral, when I dumped it all out and started to organize it in some rudimentary way across both of the queen beds in that hotel room. I still sort of remember this and just sort of seeing like, oh, with normal court documents and court records and all the stuff she's left behind and this stuff, I can really sort of piece this together, or at least have a fighting chance. And, I don't, again, long enough, I don't remember this, but I'm sure I called Bill that night and said, like, I can see her life. I can see how this happened, and I can see what else we need to do to make it work. I can see who I need to call. I can see what doors I need to knock on. I can see what other courthouses I need to go to or what other documents I need to request. And, and then actually we waited for quite some time because we had to, or a matter of months at least, because we had to wait for the sheriffs to finish their investigation, at which point their pictures became public record. And that was very helpful there. It remains a good example of, like, to me, a reminder of, like, how to do the work, how to take a chance, how to put yourself in position to get a little lucky, how to have that ongoing conversation with Bill from, kernel of idea to, getting ready to hit return and publish.
The question I was going to ask you about Catherine Norris was, you mentioned, Bill, maybe you sent Michael to go over there. Is there a dynamic that you both think of yourselves in terms of the ways that you bounce off each other, in ways that maybe Bill pushes you, Michael, and ways that Michael pushes you, Bill? Or is there strength in just the pairing alone, that you both are emboldened by each other's support?
Well, not to dwell on Catherine Norris, but there is always, not always, but often, especially in stories where you can't quite see what it's going to be. You just have a sense, you have an inkling. But I think even starting very early on in our relationship, our partnership, like, there was a level of agency that I took from Bill. Like, I mean, in some ways, if I go over to Cape Canaveral and it's nothing, like, well, Bill told me to, right? Like, there's a green light, go for it. Like, you'll probably find something, right? And that is both empowering, but it also sort of, like, ups the ante. There's a certain amount of pressure. Like, I want to not come back with nothing, right? And so with that, opportunity, with that green light, my, drive to find something worthy goes up in some concurrent way. And I don't know that, I don't know. We've worked together for so long, and I haven't worked for other people for so long, that I don't know if this is just sort of the way it works with lots of people, but I know it's the way it has worked with us, to the point where, more and more, right? I mean, I feel like some Politico stories, it was just like, just go. You'll find something and it will be good. Which, again, is both empowering and also, like, a certain amount of pressure, a good kind of pressure that I've felt, over and over again. Like, better go get it.
I'll say that Michael and I probably both subscribe to the theory that, 90% of life and reporting is, like, journalism is just showing up. Like, if you're there, as Michael says, if you go, the chances are that you're going to, that something good is going to happen. Nothing particularly good happens by not going, right? And if my trust is such in Michael after all these years that I just know that the odds are so high that if he goes, he's going to see something that maybe other people won't see, but he does, and it's just going to be worth it. So, like, yes, there's trust, but I also think we have we over time developed a kind of a simultaneity of excitement, if that makes sense. And I'm thinking specifically of the Johnson brothers, Michael.
Yeah.
And that story, if I can tell it quickly, begins with Michael at doing a story on Nikki Haley and her presidential aspirations in New Hampshire. And somebody asked a question at this appearance that struck Michael as, particularly resonant. And then Michael did what Michael does and followed up with this person and discovered that his question to Haley about what can she do to bring the country back together again actually had a really personal subtext. And it wasn't just about the country coming back together, but also this gentleman's concern that he and his own brother had parted ways because of political division. When Michael discovers that and tells me about it, I think almost immediately both of our antenna were just pinging. Like, wait a minute, what does the other brother say? And Michael then calls the other brother and discovers that yes, indeed, they have not spoken to each other. And Michael is suddenly becoming an intermediary between the two of them. And without really even having to talk about it too much, we just realized we have to write about this relationship. And that was the beginning of 9 months of, deep reporting into Ted and Fred Johnson and their family story in Centralia, Illinois. There's a simultaneity of excitement is the best way I can describe it.
It's a good example of this. And, again, this is not the only example. It happens, hopefully, for most stories to some extent. But, and it's recent enough to where I really remember that moment where I was sitting in my rental car in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, telling you, his name's Ted, his brother's name is Fred, their surname is Johnson. They grew up in a place in the middle of the country, in the middle of the state, called Centralia. And, you could, I could just sort of, I knew how I was feeling about that. I didn't know what the story is, but there's some stuff here to work with. And you can feel that coming from Bill on the other end. It's again, this is all in service at the time of a story about Nikki Haley, right? But there was just something else that was at some point we should stay in touch with this story or this potential story. And at that, shoot, the big Johnson brothers story ran, I think, more than a year after that initial conversation I just described in the rental car in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great lesson about just showing up to, we can get deep into craft, and I think for myself, I could probably overthink what's the perfect story versus just go and see where it takes you and let the story find you.
I think Michael and I both have this. There's two things going on. One is what Michael just described, the potential, that you just sense potential. Mm-hmm. In some there are elements that make you light up as a journalist, as a reporter, right? You just see if this can really be something, and you don't know exactly what it is yet. It has those little basic ingredients, and then there comes the part where you have to kind of make meaning out of these very resonant details that suggest something, and then at that point you have to commit to the exploration, right? I have to be able to say to my bosses that Michael's time is well spent plumbing this story, these brothers' lives and their family's life and this town's life as deeply as we can, because it's really going to pay off. Not next week, not next month, maybe far down the line. I have to be able to make that case. But again, this is the trust that's built up over over the years. I know that I know what Michael's capable of doing. So it's not hard for me to make that case, and it's especially easier as the reporting comes in, and it just gets, it just gets more and more real. And so, yeah, the initial excitement becomes a quest for making a point, and then that's the conversation, the continuing conversation that we were talking about earlier, just constantly reviewing it and assessing where we are, what are we learning.
Yeah, there's so much value in being a team and going to bat for each other in an environment like that. One thing Michael and I discussed before recording this podcast was, how much of a rarity it is to have this kind of reporter-editor relationship. And, there are a lot of folks out there who are freelance or who have kind of, very brief interactions with their editors. And I'm wondering if there are still lessons both for editors working with freelance writers or one-off projects with writers and vice versa, how we can show up for each other in the way that you've both been able to show up for each other over this long term, even if the circumstances aren't perfect in other people's, work relationships.
Well, I could talk a little bit about freelancers because I've worked with so many of them over the years when I was at Politico. And some I've sort of developed, continuing relationships with over years of doing stories together. I think that it's safe to say that if there was a continuing relationship, it was because there were things that I was able to do with that writer to create an approximation of the relationship that I had with Michael. Like, they were open to the constant conversation. They wanted it, needed it. They liked, me talking to them about the outline or structure of a piece before they sat down to write. Some writers, don't look for it. I kind of insist on it. And the writers that really enjoyed that part of the process were probably writers that I talked with, and worked with more frequently. But everything I do with a freelancer or a writer in, somewhere, a random writer somewhere else in the newsroom is an approximation of what Michael and I have been doing over many years. Like iterative conversations from idea to framing to outlining to editing. And
I would add that there is no obviously substitute for just sheer time reps from which emerges trust, hopefully. But you can do that more quickly. You don't need, even if you've worked with an editor for 6 months, you could make it a point to have more conversations. They don't have to be long conversations, just check-ins. Here's what I'm finding. Here's what I'm thinking. Is that right? What else? Just to establish in some small way, like the beginnings of a relationship like that. I think it makes the story better. It makes the reporting better, which in turn, of course, makes the story better, have a chance to be better. And there's a way to do that without being sort of a bother, without being needy, right? And I think the best editors, obviously everybody's pressed for time and everybody's got too much to do, but the best editors want that. I think they don't want somebody to just be sort of off doing a thing, whether it's for 3 hours or 3 months, and then come back and have everybody be sort of have the editor be in the dark, and and now you're having a conversation for the first time about what the story is really about. I just don't know how that works, and so I think you can do miniature versions of that much earlier in a much more fledgling relationship that will benefit. That will be a benefit to the work and make just the experience, just from a human standpoint, but also from a learning and a career standpoint, just way more enjoyable.
But I want to ask you both just any sort of, lessons for emerging journalists, both on the writer side and editor side, on how to work with the other, and what you recommend for those who are sort of just getting started within this journey. What Bill recommends to writers, and what you recommend to editors.
Well, I'll piggyback a little bit on what Michael just said about, from a writer's perspective, asking something of your editor, seeking their input, in a way, pressing them to be present, if you will, in the process. It's easy for editors to get swamped by the bureaucratic budget madness and meeting madness that is, the life of an editor. But the most important thing we will ever do is to work through a story with the writer, not write the budget line for the news meeting at 3 p.m. That makes other editors happy. It's absolutely necessary, but it is not fundamentally what we're here for. We're here for the journalism, to make help writers do their best work. That's what we do. And sometimes it's easy, like I say, to just get lost in the newsroom madness. So if a writer reaches out, and says, hey, here I am, this is what I've seen, help me, talk to me. That's good. It's a good reminder for editors. I find myself, just because I like it, reaching out more proactively to writers, because I hate filling out budget lines, and I would much rather be on the phone with a writer than in a meeting. But I would just, my counsel to the writers would be like, poke them.
And I suppose my counsel to reporters would be try to see editors as partners more than bosses. Part of the job of doing the work, and hopefully the best work one can do, and part of the job of building a career, is to work to foster those relationships. Maybe not just with one editor, with that editor's peers and colleagues, with that editor's editors. That way, it feels like a team effort rather than almost adversarial. Like there is sort of that feel sometimes. This editor is making me do this and like messing with my copy, and I just, everybody does it different ways. And granted, I've been to this point exceptionally fortunate with editors, Bill and otherwise, but it also is on you too. It takes two to tango. Work to make that relationship work for you. I don't want to just, file a story and then have it come back with, corrections on it. That's not what this is about. This is a team effort to make the best possible stories and to do reporting the best possible way, the most responsible possible ways. And I know that I'm saying this at a time when, sort of more and more in vogue is, or even sort of available is to, strike out on your own and be sort of independent operators. And, you are your own entity and your own company on Substack or what have you. And it has worked for some people and will continue to work for some people. But it's just, for whatever reason, it's not how I'm wired. It's not how I'd like to work ever. And so to the extent that you're in a position to foster those sorts of relationships with an editor or editors, do it. It'll make your work better.
That is a great note to end on. Michael, Bill, thank you both. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again to Michael and Bill, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you like what we're doing with Nieman Storyboard, leave us a written review and a rating in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you soon.